Two people are sitting at a table, working at something, and neither one of them is speaking. One of them lifts their head and looks past the other towards the door. Nothing is said. Nothing needs to be. Before a single word arrives, the second person is looking at the door as well. That small handover is what the whole of tonight is about. It is so ordinary that it has almost certainly happened to you today, more than once, and left no mark at all on your memory. It is also one of the strangest things about us. Notice what did not happen there. The second person did not simply register that somebody nearby had moved. They read a direction off a face. Not roughly either, closely enough to name the spot on the wall. Let that settle a moment before we go any further. Let the shoulders come down away from the ears. Let the next breath out run a little longer than the one that came in. There is no hurry anywhere in this, and there is a great deal of time. Here is the shape of the difficulty. A face gives that direction away constantly to anybody at all and asks nothing in return. Almost nothing else alive is willing to do that. Think back to the last time somebody's attention moved at the edge of a room. A door, a cat crossing a hallway, a light coming on outside. You did not see the thing itself first. You saw the seeing, and then you turned, and only afterwards did the pair of you find out what had been there all along. The direction arrives before the content does. That is the small marvel sitting underneath tonight. Now set that beside the rest of the living world, because here is where it starts to look genuinely odd. Where a creature is looking is where it is about to go. It is where the food is, or the way out, or the thing it would much rather keep well clear of. That is a valuable piece of information, and it is valuable to everything else standing nearby. So the living world, almost without exception, keeps that particular card face down. There is a long stretch about how it manages that coming later on, and I mean to take my time over it. I will leave it sitting there for now. We hold ours up. All day. To strangers, and for nothing, which leaves two questions lying on the table, and I would like you to carry both of them with you tonight. The first is the obvious one. Why would a species come to give away the single thing most worth keeping quiet? The second is the better one, and it is the one that takes the whole night. What had to already be true about us before giving it away could possibly be safe? I will hold both of those open a long while. I am not going to answer either one yet. You have been reading faces all day without once deciding to do it. Since before the light was properly up, most likely, and steadily onwards from there, through everything else the day happened to ask of you. Not one of those readings cost you the slightest effort. Not one of them was worth filing away afterwards. That is what I would like you to carry into the next hour. Not a fact to be remembered, and nothing you need to keep hold of. Just the quiet oddity of a skill that runs all day long, at no cost whatsoever, entirely underneath the part of you that decides things. And in every room where this is being heard tonight, that same small oddity is sitting there, going unanswered. Notice how forgiving the whole business is, as well. It works across a wide room. It works in poor light. It works from the far end of a hallway, with a lamp glaring behind somebody's head. It works from the side, at an angle where both eyes cannot properly be seen. It works on a face known for 30 years, and just as well on a face seen once and never again. It works through glass. It works in a photograph, where nothing is moving and nothing ever will move again. None of those conditions ought to be easy. A wide room means the whole face has gone small. Poor light means the detail has mostly drained out of it. An angle means half the evidence is simply missing. And still the reading comes through, and still it comes through quickly. It is finer than it sounds too. You can tell the difference between being looked at and being looked past. You can tell whether the attention has settled on your eyes or on your mouth. That is a matter of a few degrees, read right across a room in about a second. It is read correctly almost every time. None of it ever required a decision. It has happened hundreds of times today already, and not once did anybody catch themselves at it. That is exactly why it stays invisible. A skill you notice is a skill that sometimes fails you. You notice a name you cannot retrieve. You notice a word that will not come. This one never fails in any way that announces itself, so there is nothing to snag the attention, and nothing gets remembered. Consider what it would take to make it visible. You would have to sit in a room and deliberately try not to know where anybody was looking. It cannot be done. The information arrives whether it is wanted or not, in the same way a loud sound arrives, and the arriving is not something anyone gets a vote on. A thing that reliable stops looking like a thing at all. It just becomes the way rooms are. So think for a moment about what it actually hands over, because it is a great deal more than a direction. Where a person is looking is where their attention is, and where their attention is sits very close indeed to what they want, or to what they are carefully avoiding, or to what they have just this second decided to do next. The door somebody keeps checking. The plate they have already chosen without saying a word about it. The line on the page they cannot seem to get past. The one face in a crowded room that a glance keeps quietly returning to. None of that is ever spoken aloud. All of it gets sent anyway. It is no small channel, either. Consider how much of an ordinary conversation runs on it, and on nothing else at all. Whose turn it is to speak next? When somebody has finished and is handing the floor across to you. When a person stopped listening a full sentence before they are going to admit it. All of that travels on the direction of a glance. None of it goes anywhere near language. You have sat in a room and known, without a single word being said, that somebody was about to get up and leave. You have known which of two people a third one was really speaking to. You have understood that a question was aimed at you rather than at the person beside you, and you understood it well before the question was finished. Meanwhile, everybody else in that room was reading the same thing off your own face at the very same moment. Almost none of it was deliberate on anybody's part. That is a great deal of private information moving about in the open all day long. Nobody ever agreed to any of it. And it runs in both directions at once, which is the part that rarely gets said. Nobody stands outside the arrangement as an observer. Everyone is inside it, sending the whole time they are receiving at the same speed, with no way to do one and not the other. Every glance you take at somebody is also a small announcement about you, where your attention went, how long it stayed there, whether it came back. 3 people in a room means 3 broadcasts and 3 readings, all running together, all continuously. Nobody is directing any of it. Nobody could keep up with it deliberately if they tried. And the whole exchange settles itself, moment by moment, without ever surfacing into anything that anyone would call thinking. Nor can anybody easily stop. A person can decide not to say a thing, and hold to that decision for hours. Nobody can decide not to look. The moment the look happens, the telling has already happened alongside it. There is something else folded into all this, and it is worth naming early, because it comes back at the very end of the night. Two people can look at the same thing and each one know that the other is looking at it. Not guess, not assume, know, and then know that the other one knows as well. That sounds like a small technical point. It is not. A very great deal of what we manage to do together stands on that single arrangement, and there is a whole long stretch of tonight given over to it later on. So let us be honest about where we have arrived. We have a face that broadcasts, constantly and accurately, a piece of information that everything else alive takes a good deal of trouble to keep hidden. It works at distance, in poor light, at an angle, and through glass. It runs without effort, and without asking anybody's permission. And we do not yet properly know why. There are good answers waiting. They are not the answers most people expect. They took a long time to arrive, and they were built out of patient measurement rather than out of guesswork. Some of the argument about them is still going on right now, among people being very careful indeed. We will get to all of it in time. The apes are coming, and they behave differently from us in a way that is genuinely surprising. So is a measurement made right across a great many species, which is where the hard evidence properly begins. So is an experiment that put the question to the test directly. So is the part where a tidy story gets corrected in public, by people doing honest and unglamorous work. But not yet, and not in that order, because the two questions stay open. Why would a species give away the one thing most worth hiding? And what had to already be true about us before doing that could possibly be safe? We will get there together, slowly. The getting there is the good part. But let us start where starting is easiest, not with theories, not with apes, and not with anybody's careful measurement. Let us start with what is actually there, in your own face, under your own fingers, tonight so, what is actually there. Sit still for a minute and bring a hand up towards your face, not to the eye itself, and never anywhere near it. Just rest a fingertip on the small ridge of bone below the eye, the one you can feel easily through the skin. Then let it travel gently outwards towards the corner. There is a soft hollow there, and then bone again, and then the side of the head. What sits in that hollow is not the shape most people picture. It is not a disc, and it is not an oval either. It is a ball, roughly the size of a large marble, held in a cup of bone and moved by small muscles that hardly ever stop working. Almost all of that sphere is hidden. You were looking at a face a minute ago, or at least at a picture of one. What was visible of the eyeball itself was a narrow strip at the very front. The rest sits back inside the skull, behind the lids and behind the bone. Everything tonight lives in that narrow strip. Try this, gently. Keep your head perfectly still and look to the far left of wherever you are, then to the far right, without letting the head follow. Do it again slowly, left, then right, then back to the middle. Nothing on the outside of the face moved. No muscle in the cheek, nothing in the jaw, nothing anybody could have felt with a hand on your temple. The sphere simply rotated in its cup, quietly, the way a globe turns on a stand. That is worth sitting with, because it is the physical basis of everything else. The eye can point somewhere the head is not pointing. Attention and posture come apart. A person can be facing one way and be entirely somewhere else, and the only outward evidence is a small change in a narrow strip of tissue in your face. If the eye were fixed in the skull, none of this would exist. Everything would have to be read off the head, and the head is a slow, obvious, easily controlled thing. The eye is fast, and it is also almost impossible to control. Now the strip itself. The outer coat of that sphere is a tough, fibrous layer, and it has a name that will come up all night. The sclera. Say it once and let it settle, because everything from here on hangs on it. The sclera is the shell. It holds the round shape, it keeps the pressure inside steady, and it gives those small muscles something firm to pull against. It wraps very nearly the whole eyeball. Then, at the very front, it stops and turns clear, and that clear part is the window you actually look out through. It is pale because it is dense and fibrous, and it scatters the light falling on it rather than letting it pass through. So the visible sclera is not a circle, and it is not a background either. It is a band, two bands really, one on either side of the coloured ring in the middle, joining above and below in a thin curve. That band is the subject of this whole episode, and it is on your face right now. It is not large. Across a kitchen table it comes to a few millimetres of exposed tissue on each side. And it is not clever. It does not move on its own. It has no signal of its own to send, and no way of choosing when to send it. It is a piece of tough tissue that catches whatever light is in the room and returns some of it. That is all. That is the entire mechanism. Nothing you do can switch it off, because there is nothing there to switch. Now, the brightness of that band. We call it the white of the eye. That is a name, not a measurement, and it is worth being careful with it from the very start. If there is a mirror near you, or a dark window, or a phone lying face up, this is easy to check for yourself. Lean in and look at your own band of sclera properly, the way nobody ever really does. It is not one flat colour, almost nobody's is. Look at somebody you know well and the same thing will be true of theirs. The brightness of that band is not one setting for everybody. It varies from person to person, and it varies between populations, in the same ordinary way that hair varies and skin varies. Whatever the shade happens to be in your own face, it belongs inside that ordinary range. Visible colour in it is common and completely ordinary. A warm cream, a soft grey, a brownish or slate tint spread across the exposed part, or gathered towards the corners, or laid down in small freckles of pigment that have been there since early childhood and will be there for life. You have seen every one of those on people you love without a moment's thought. That kind of pigmentation is more common among people with darker skin, and it is simply part of how the eye is built in that face. None of it is a fault, and none of it is a departure from anything. It is the ordinary range of a species. Hair runs from near black to near white, and not one of those shades is the correct one. It matters that this gets said now, early and plainly. The short version of tonight's story, written down in a great many places, describes some human eyes and quietly treats them as the human eye. If your own have never quite matched that description, they were never the exception to anything. The description was simply too narrow. That is a real problem with a real fix, and there is an honest stretch coming much later where it gets sorted out properly. I am only planting it here so that you have it before we need it. Because here is what survives the correction, and it is the engine of everything that follows. The thing that carries the signal was never whiteness. In the middle of that band sits the coloured ring, the iris. The iris is what people mean when they ask what colour your eyes are. Brown, most commonly across most of the world. Hazel, grey, green, blue, amber, and every mixture in between, often with the two eyes in one face not quite matching. Look very closely and it is not a flat ring at all, but a set of fine fibbres running outwards from the centre like spokes, arranged differently in every face that has ever existed, including your own. It is not decoration, either. The iris is a muscle, and it works the way an aperture works, opening the hole at its centre wider when the light is low and closing it down when the light is strong. You have watched that happen in somebody's face 100 times without ever once remarking on it. And the hole at the centre, the pupil, is genuinely a hole. That is worth saying plainly, because it looks so much like an object. It is not one, but an opening, and it is dark for the simple reason that light goes in through it, and very little of that light comes back out to you. So the front of your eye is three things, and only three. A dark opening, a coloured ring around it, and, either side of that ring, an exposed band of the tough outer coat. Now put the three of them together, because this is what the rest of the episode rests on. What carries the signal is contrast. Two things, and both of them are simple. The first is difference. The band is lighter than the ring sitting in the middle of it. Lighter, not white, and not any fixed shade at all. It only has to differ enough from the iris that an edge shows, which is a far lower bar than whiteness, and a far more widely met one. The second is exposure. How much of that lighter band is showing, and on which side of the ring. That second one is what is actually being read, second by second, in every face you look at. Try it. If there is somebody with you, watch what happens when they look off to one side without moving their head. The dark ring travels, and the band does something that almost nobody consciously registers. It opens up wide on one side and narrows almost to nothing on the other. You are not measuring an angle. You are reading a ratio, and your brain has been doing that particular arithmetic all day without mentioning it. Two pale shapes, one growing and one shrinking, either side of a dark disk that slides between them. That is the whole signal. Light, dark, and how the two are shared out. And once it is seen as a ratio, it becomes obvious why it survives such poor conditions. A ratio does not care much about the level of the light. Dim the room and both parts dim together, and the proportion between them holds. Step back across that room and both parts get smaller, and the proportion holds. That is why it works at a distance, and in a hallway at night, and through a windscreen at dusk. It is the same reason you can read a sign from the far end of a dim platform. The shape of the difference is doing the work, not the amount of light. There is one more reason the exposure matters, and it has to do with the shape of the opening in your face. The gap between the lids is wider from side to side than from top to bottom, so the band has room to grow and shrink sideways, which is precisely the direction most looking gets done in. Somebody did eventually go and measure that very carefully across a great many species, and that comes later. So bring your fingers back up to your own face and leave them there while we finish. Under the eye first, on that small ridge of bone, then out to the corner, and then up to the brow bone above. Inside those 3 points is a small open window in your own head, wider across than it is tall. Hold still now, look straight ahead, and picture what is sitting in that window. Close to, it is three things, the way we just took it apart. From across a room it is only two. The coloured ring and the dark opening stop being separate at any real distance, and read as one dark circle. So there is a dark circle at the centre, and a paler band on each side of it, one running out towards the nose, one towards the temple, not above it and below it. Beside it, left and right. That is what is under your fingertips right now. Two pale shapes side by side with one dark circle between them, and the whole arrangement laid out along a line running from ear to ear. There is nothing else in there. No mechanism, no muscle for signalling, nothing that does anything at all but sit still and return the light in the room. And every person you meet reads it instantly, without effort, and without ever having been taught how. Keep hold of that shape. Everything after this is built on it. It is an extraordinarily open arrangement, sitting there on your face in the dark, telling anybody who cares to look. And nearly everything else on earth that has eyes has gone the other way entirely, and gone there with real determination. That is where we go next. Let your hand come down now. Rest it somewhere comfortable. Keep what you just found, though. Hold on to the shape of it. A dark circle, a paler band on either side, the whole arrangement set into a face. Now carry that shape outside, not out of the room, only out into the rest of the living world, which is enormous, and which has been working on this same problem for an extremely long time. The problem is easy to state. Eyes give things away. Here is the rule, and it holds nearly everywhere. Where an animal is looking is where that animal is about to go. Or it is the thing the animal wants. Or it is the thing that has just worried it. A gaze is an intention arriving early. It turns up a second or two ahead of the body, before a single muscle has committed to anything. Now think what that is worth to whoever happens to be watching. If you are hungry, and the creature ahead of you has shown where its attention has gone, then it has also shown where it will shortly be. And if that creature can tell it has been noticed, it gains a little time. Time is very nearly everything out there. So the same small scrap of information is valuable in both directions at once, and it costs absolutely nothing to read, which makes it worth hiding. And almost everything hides it. Start with the simplest method, because it is also the commonest. Make the eye one dark thing. In most animals, the visible part of the eye is nearly all iris, and there is very little else there for you to work with. That iris is dark brown, or amber, or something close to black. The pupil sits inside it without showing much of an edge. There is little or no pale tissue to either side, because the lids come in close around the iris and stop there. Very little of the eyeball is exposed at all, so the whole eye reads as a single dark bead. In poor light it works better still, because a dark eye and a dark face has almost nothing left to give away. You can tell it is an eye. You can tell it is open. Which way it is actually pointed is a far harder question, and mostly it is guesswork. Watch a crow on a fence sometime, in easy light, from a distance comfortable enough that neither of you has to think about the other. The crow is aware of you, and that much is obvious. Beyond that, the bird is not saying. Some creatures take it further still, and there are geckos and snakes whose irises carry the same fine pattern as the skin around them, so the eye never sits on the head as a separate object. The camouflage simply continues across it without interruption, the way a pattern on wallpaper runs straight on through a light switch. The eye becomes part of the general business of the face. Then comes a second method, and it is bolder. If the eye cannot be hidden, hide its outline. Draw a dark line straight through it. You already know this one, even if you have never named it. A raccoon wears a mask laid across both eyes, and you have seen it 100 times without once asking what it might be for. A badger carries a broad stripe running the whole length of the face. Great numbers of small birds have a dark line that starts at the beak, runs back through the eye, and carries on toward the neck. On a reef, dozens of fish wear a vertical dark bar dropped down through the eye like a single stroke of ink. Look at one straight on, and the bar goes to work on you at once, because your eye lands on the stripe and settles there, and the real eye behind it never quite registers as a separate thing. The effect is quiet and rather clever, and it works on nearly anything with eyes. The eye stops being a shape that ends. The dark of the eye and the dark of the band become one continuous mark, and a mark like that gives away nothing about direction. It is the oldest idea in all of camouflage. Nothing has to be removed. A thing only has to stop looking like itself. Notice something about that list, because it matters more than it first appears. A badger is not hiding from very much. Neither is a raccoon, and neither is a hunting cat, whose dark eye gives away just as little as a rabbit's does. This is not a prey animal's equipment. Predators conceal where they are looking just as thoroughly as anything they might be looking at. Same reason, mirrored. One side is hiding an approach, and the other is hiding an escape. Both ends of the arrangement have exactly the same interest in staying quiet about it. There is a third method, and it is the strangest of the three. Put an eye where no eye is. Butterfly wings carry them, and so do the wings of many moths, the flanks of certain fish, the back ends of some caterpillars. Big round marks, ringed, often with a pale glint painted in near the top, precisely where a highlight would fall on something wet and living. They are false eye spots. Very often they are larger and clearer than the real eyes. A butterfly fish on a reef will wear both tricks at once. A dark bar down through the true eye at the front, a large round spot toward the tail at the back. Read that fish in a hurry, and you read it backwards. Attention goes to the wrong end, and the wrong end is not where the fish is looking, and not where the fish is about to go. The fourth method is not a marking at all. It is a matter of where the eyes sit in the skull. Picture a rabbit, or a horse, or a deer, or a pigeon on a ledge. Their eyes are set high and wide on the sides of the head. That arrangement buys something close to a full circle of vision, no turning required. A creature built that way can watch you steadily, while its head points somewhere else entirely. The head is not a reliable pointer. It was never asked to be one. The next time a bird on a path lets you come nearer than you expected, that is what has been happening. You were watched the entire way in, by an eye that never once had to move. None of this is cunning, and none of it is sly. No animal has ever decided to conceal its gaze. Nothing out there is being careful on purpose, and none of it was ever aimed at you. These are simply the arrangements that lasted. Bodies that gave a little less away were, across an enormous stretch of time, a little more likely to still be here. That is the whole of the mechanism, and it is an extremely patient one. Think of the nearest animal to where you are sitting. There may be one in the room, which would be convenient. A cat folded into a chair with its paws tucked underneath. A dog stretched along the floor. A fish moving slowly in a lit tank in the corner. If there is nothing indoors, there is almost certainly something beyond the window, whatever hour it happens to be where you are. a bird settled on a ledge. Something small down in the grass, or something high in a tree. Now consider how that animal gets read. It is read by the ears, if they are the kind that move. By the set of the head, the line of the shoulders, by stillness, and by the exact quality of that stillness, and by the moment it ends. What is not on offer is a bright band beside a dark circle, announcing from across a room the precise thing that has been fixed on. That reading has never been available, not once, in the whole history of the arrangement. Then turn to the nearest person instead. If somebody is with you, the work is already done. Several times over probably, no effort at all. You know whether they are reading. You know whether they are looking past you toward the door. And they know the same in return, and not one word of it has been spoken aloud. Sit for a moment with the size of that difference. Almost everything alive is quietly playing its gaze down. Dark eyes, bars and masks, false spots painted at the wrong end, eyes set wide so the head tells a small untruth about the attention behind it. We went the other way. We put ours in a window with a light behind it. That is the strangeness this whole thing rests on, and it is better felt than simply told. It is not that we are better at some skill, it is that our faces publish, continuously, and for nothing. The exact piece of information nearly every other lineage has spent unimaginable time learning to keep back. Your face is doing it right now, in a dim room, to nobody at all. We hand it to whoever is facing us. We never feel it leave. It is the one possession nobody has ever had to guard, because it was never once experienced as a possession at all. So both questions are still sitting there, and they have grown a little heavier since you first heard them. Why would an animal give away the one thing most worth hiding? And what had to already be true about the life of that animal before giving it away could possibly be safe? Neither one gets answered tonight for a good while yet. There is a proper order to this, and we are going to keep to it. The next thing is a measurement. Somebody sat down and did this carefully, comparing the outside of the eye across something close to 90 species of primate, and what came back were numbers rather than impressions. 2 numbers, in fact, and the less famous of the 2 may be the one that stays with you. After that comes the payoff, which has a plain name and a very domestic feel to it, and which turns out to be the hinge of nearly everything you have ever done alongside another person. Then our nearest relatives, and what they actually do when a gaze is offered to them, which is not quite what you might expect, and which is no kind of failure on their part. Then an experiment. Somebody altered a photograph of a chimpanzee's eye, deliberately, to find out whether the contrast itself was doing real work, or whether we had been flattering ourselves all along. And then, later, the trouble. The tidy version of this story has been argued with recently by careful people, and parts of it do not survive the argument. All of it gets taken seriously when we arrive there, and the argument comes to you as it actually stands, rather than tidied up first. Nothing is swept aside. For now, just hold the picture. A world full of animals, in water, in trees, in long grass, every one of them furnished with some quiet way of not saying where it is looking. And one animal, warm and slow and settling into a bed, with a small bright band either side of a dark circle, announcing itself to the whole still room. That animal is you. So somebody went and measured it. That is the next part of this, and it is a quieter part. No revelation, and no single moment where anyone shouts. Just 2 people with cameras a very long list of animals, and the patience to do the same small thing over and over until the thing turned into a number. Their names were Hiromi Kobayashi and Shiro Koshima, and they were working in Japan. The paper appeared in 1997 in the journal Nature, and it was short. The kind of paper you could read standing up. A fuller version, with all the working shown, followed a few years afterwards. The question they set themselves is the one you have been carrying all evening. Is the human eye actually unusual? Or does it only feel unusual to us because it happens to be the one we look at most? That is a real distinction, and it is worth resting on for a second. Everyone who has ever stood in front of a chimpanzee has had an impression about its eyes. Impressions are cheap. They are also unreliable, and they have a habit of agreeing with whoever is having them. An impression can be carried for 40 years without ever once being wrong, because there is nothing in it that can be checked. So the two of them did the unglamorous thing instead. They gathered photographs of the eye region across 88 species of primate, which was roughly half of every primate then recognized. Lemurs and lorises, macaques, baboons, genons, gibbons and langurs, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and us. Getting those photographs is most of the work and none of the glory. The animal has to be awake. It has to be facing more or less the right way, in light that is good enough, with its eyes open and not mid-blink. It cannot be asked to hold still, or to look at the camera, or to try that again. So you wait. You wait in a zoo or at a research centre on an ordinary afternoon for an animal to glance up in your direction for no particular reason. Multiply one of those afternoons by 88 species, and you begin to get some sense of what this quietly cost the people doing it. Then the measuring, which has to be boring or it is worthless. The same landmarks on every single photograph, this corner of the eye, that edge of the iris, this upper lid, that lower one. Measured the same way, in the same units, in the same order, across every species, with no exceptions made for the interesting ones. Nobody gets a special rule, because they are us. That sounds obvious until you try it, and then you find out how much a person would quietly like to make an exception for the one species they happen to belong to. And ratios, rather than raw sizes. That decision matters more than it sounds. A mouse lemur's eye and a gorilla's eye cannot be compared in millimetres in any way that means anything at all. But a ratio does not care how large the animal is. A ratio asks the same fair question of everybody in the room, and it lets the smallest primate in the sample answer on equal terms with the largest. It is a small, careful choice, made early and never advertised, and a great deal of what follows rests on it. The first number is the famous one. They wanted to know how much of the eyeball is left showing to either side of the iris, the pale band you found on your own face a little while ago. So they defined an index for it. The width of the exposed eyeball set against the size of the iris itself. You can think of it as asking how many irises wide the visible eye actually is. One iris wide would mean an eye entirely filled by its own colour, with nothing spare at the sides at all. 2 irises wide would mean an eye showing as much pale as dark. In most of the primates they measured, the answer came back small. The lids sit close. The iris fills nearly the whole of the opening, and there is very little left over on either side for you to read. Humans came out at the top of the range, the largest exposed ratio of every species in that sample. Now hold that sentence carefully in your head, because the careful version is the true one, and it is going to matter enormously later. Not the only species with any exposure at all. The largest one measured. This is a result about degree and about proportion, and it will come back to you before the night is out. There is always a temptation, when a result comes out looking like that, to reach straight for the word unique, and you will hear people do exactly that. They were more careful than that, and so will we be. The second number got far less attention. I suspect it is the more interesting of the two. They also measured the shape of the eye's outline itself, how wide your eye is, set against how tall it is, a simple width divided by a height. On that measure as well, your species sat at the extreme of the sample, the most horizontally elongated eye outline of anything they photographed. A long, low, sideways opening in the front of your face. Not round, the way you draw an eye as a child, but wider than it is tall by a greater margin than anything else in the sample. That can sound like a decorative detail. It is not. It is the half that makes the other half work. Exposed sclera on its own supplies you with contrast. Contrast on its own says only that something is there. For an actual reading, there has to be travel. Picture any dial you have ever read without thinking about it. A needle on a gauge. A fuel indicator. The slider on a volume control. What makes a thing like that readable is not really the needle at all. It is the length of track the needle has to move along, and the fact that both ends of the run are visible at once. A pointer with nowhere to go is not an instrument. Now put that back onto a face. The iris is the needle, and the pale bands to either side are the track it runs on. In a round, tight opening, that track is short in every direction. The iris drifts a little way and then the lid takes it. And everything between the two extremes is guesswork. Stretch the opening sideways and the track becomes long. The iris can travel properly, and every position along that run is a separate, readable, unmistakable statement about where the attention has gone. The lids limit the up and down in any case. The upper one rests over the top of the iris most of the time, in most faces, which makes vertical movement a poor material to build a signal out of. And the direction of the stretch is not an accident either. Almost everything worth looking at is arranged sideways. The horizon is sideways. A room is sideways. A path, a table, a shoreline, a row of faces. The people beside you are to your left and your right, and so is nearly everything anyone has ever needed to point out to anybody else. You rarely have to tell somebody that the thing is above them. You have to tell them it is over there, constantly, all day, for a whole lifetime. There is one more thing the elongation buys, and it is the practical one. It survives bad conditions. When the eye is wide, the two pale bands are wide as well. And the reading is not really taken from the iris directly. It is taken by comparing two bands and noticing that one of them has become larger than the other. A wider eye makes that difference physically bigger, which is why it holds up when the room is dim, or the face is turned partly away, or the person is right across a hall. The signal keeps working after the conditions stop being kind. That is what horizontal elongation is for, and it is why it deserves to be spoken about in the same breath as the more famous number. Now step back and look at what those two measurements actually did. Before them, there was a feeling, a widespread, confident, entirely untested feeling that our eyes are different. Afterwards, there is a method, a published set of values, and a list of species that anybody else can go and check for themselves. That is the whole difference, and it is not a small one. A number can be disagreed with precisely. A feeling cannot really be disagreed with at all, only swapped for somebody else's. Once the ratio exists, a person can arrive years later with better photographs and more species. Your sample was thin in this corner, they can say, and your index behaves oddly for that group, and I have measured it again, and I get something a little different. And people did exactly that. It is coming, and we are not going to flinch from it. Careful measurement is never the exciting part of any of this. It is also the only part that lasts. They looked at colour as well. Incidentally, we are going to come back to colour much later, and slowly and carefully, because colour is where this story stops being tidy. Let it stand where it is for now. So here is where the evening has arrived. We can measure the thing. Your species leaves more of the eyeball showing, relative to the iris, than any other in a sample of 88. The outline of that eye is the most stretched sideways of the set. And the two findings work as a pair, one supplying the contrast and the other supplying the room to move. And we still have not said why any animal on Earth would want that. Nothing measured explains it. A measurement tells you what is there and how much of it. It has nothing whatever to say about what the thing is for, or what it costs, or why a creature would carry it around in the open where anything at all can read it. What a measurement is a beginning. It is the moment a question stops being a matter of opinion and turns into something you can actually go to work on. The answer has a name. The name is deliberately plain, and it is where we go next. Two people, one thing, and each of them knowing the other is looking at it too. After that, our nearest relatives, and what they actually do with a gaze when one is offered to them. Then the experiment, where somebody altered a photograph on purpose to find out whether the contrast is doing real work. And after all of that, the argument, which is honest and recent and unfinished. For now, let the two numbers settle. They are in your face at this moment, both of them, whether or not you are giving them any thought. A ratio of exposure. A width set against a height. Somebody counted patiently across 88 species to find out where the human eye sits, and it sits at the far end of both lists. You did nothing to earn that. It arrived with the face, the way everything else about a face arrives, and it is still, at this hour of the night, entirely unexplained. Unexplained is a fair place to have arrived. A number is a good thing to have, because it settles the question of whether something is genuinely unusual. What it will not tell you is what the unusual thing is for. So set the measuring down for a while, and let me take you into a kitchen instead. Two people are making a meal in it, and neither of them is talking. One is at the counter with wet hands, and the other is over by the stove, busy with something else entirely. The one at the counter needs the small bowl, which is up on the shelf behind the other one's shoulder. Watch what happens now, because the whole thing takes about a second. There is no request, and no name is spoken. The one at the counter simply looks up and looks at the bowl, and the one at the stove catches where that look went. A hand goes up to the shelf, the bowl comes down onto the counter, and the two of them carry on with what they were doing. Nobody said the word bowl. You have done this, probably today, in your own kitchen, with somebody you live with. It is so ordinary that calling it remarkable feels like overreach. So let me go slowly and lay out what had to be true in that quiet room. First, one person's eyes moved, not far. The iris slid a short way against the tissue around it, and that small movement was the entire signal. Second, the other one read that movement from several feet away at an angle in the ordinary evening light you have in your own kitchen while thinking about something else. Third, they read it as a want and not merely as a direction. Not up there. That one, please. And fourth, which is the one to hold on to, because we are coming back to it. The person who looked already knew that all of that would happen. She did not look at the bowl and then hope. She looked at the bowl as a way of asking. That fourth thing is the whole trick, and hardly anybody ever notices it. Now take those same two people out to a bench in the garage. A chair has come apart at the joint, and they are gluing it back together. One of them is holding the two halves square, which takes both hands and all of their attention, and the clamp is down at the far end of the bench. They do not say clamp. They look at it. A moment later the clamp is in their hand, and the one who fetched it has already moved on, because the next thing is obvious to both of them. That is two people working as a single pair of hands. No instructions were issued, and no plan was agreed in advance. The whole quiet coordination ran on nothing but where the eyes went. Now put something awkward between them. A table going through a narrow door, or a mattress on a staircase with a turn halfway up. You have carried something like this with somebody. You are walking backwards. The corner behind you is out of sight. Your hands are full, and speech turns out to be nearly useless. Because left means two opposite things when two people are facing each other. So you stop talking and watch their face. Their eyes flick to the doorframe on your side, and at once you know which corner is about to catch. You lift, it clears easily, and not a word was said about it. Or think of two people clearing a table after a meal. Nobody divides the job out loud. One reaches for the plates and the other gathers the glasses, and the two pairs of hands cross in the middle without ever colliding. If anybody asked them afterwards how they had decided, neither could say. They would say it was obvious. It was obvious, because each of them could see what the other had already settled on. Now let a small child into the room. She is up on a stool at the counter, watching an adult fold dough over on itself. Nobody is teaching. There is no lesson here, no explanation, nothing that anybody could write down, and yet she is learning the thing, and learning it quickly. Watch where she looks, because she does not watch the whole scene evenly. She watches the hands, and just before the hands she watches the eyes. When the adult's gaze settles on the seam, hers settles there too. When it moves to the rim of the bowl, so does she. The adult's attention is doing the pointing. The adult's attention is the lesson. That is teaching without instructions. And it is probably how most of what you know was handed to you, long before anybody tried to put it into words. There is a smaller one too, so small that you almost certainly used it today. The word that. You are standing at a shelf with somebody, and you say, that one. Two words, carrying almost no information at all. They mean only this, the thing I am attending to right now. And the other person reaches out and takes hold of the right object, gently, first time. That word should not work. It works because the two of you are already looking together. Every language on earth does this. Every one of them keeps a small handful of words that carry almost no content at all, and lean instead on wherever the speaker's attention happens to be resting. This one. That one. Over there. Those words are, in a quiet sense, made out of gaze. So come back to the fourth thing in the kitchen. Two people attending to the same object is not yet the trick. Two strangers can watch the same sunset from opposite ends of a beach and share nothing at all. Same object, two separate experiences, sitting side by side and sealed off from one another. The trick is the second half. Each one knows that the other is attending, and each one knows that the other knows. Say that slowly, because it folds back on itself, and the folding is the whole point. Go back to her wet hands at the counter. Her look at the bowl was not simply a movement of the eyes, it was an act addressed to somebody. It only works as a request because she knows that her looking can be seen. And he has to know she meant it to be seen, or the bowl still arrives, but she could never have relied on its arriving. Both of them are inside the same small fact at the same moment, and neither of them will ever think about it once. That mutual knowing is what the word joint is doing in the phrase joint attention. Not shared as in both happening to look, shared as in both holding the same thread, and each one feeling the other hold it. And once that is in place, look at everything that comes with it, free of charge. You can hand something to somebody who has not looked at it yet, because where you look, they will look. You can work alongside a person all afternoon in near silence, and the labour quietly divides itself. One takes the far end of the row, and one takes the near end. Nobody assigned it. You can agree on what that one means. You can pass on a skill that nobody could describe. You can put a tool into a hand that never asked for it. Think for a moment about how much of an ordinary day runs on this. The person who steps aside in a corridor before anyone has said anything. The one who slides the salt across the table without looking up from their plate. The colleague who turns a screen a few degrees so that two people can see it. None of that is politeness, exactly. It is two people keeping track of one another's attention, all day long, easily and without comment. Almost everything that people build together rests on this, and it is made of nothing but a small dark disk moving against a lighter surround and being watched. There is a name for this idea in the research literature. An earlier proposal held that the visible human eye is a signal, shaped over time to be read by others. A group of researchers led by Michael Tomasello took that thought further, and their version is usually called the cooperative eye hypothesis. Stated plainly, it runs like this. The human eye is conspicuous because human life is cooperative. Notice which way that claim points. It does not say that the eye made us cooperative. It leans the other way, towards something having already been true of us first, and that is exactly the second half of the question we have been holding open all along. You can hold that one in an open hand tonight. It is careful work by careful people, and it is also an idea that has had parts of it quietly walked back since. We will come to that honestly later on. For now it can simply sit there, unhurried, as one possible answer among several. Because notice what we have, and notice what we still do not have. We have a rich and convincing account of what a readable eye buys you. Teaching, pointing, and the whole soft machinery of getting things done beside another person without needing to explain yourself. That is a great deal. It is also not the same as showing that it is the reason. A thing can be enormously useful without that use being why it is there in the first place. Your hands are wonderfully good at holding a phone, and they did not become hands for that. Usefulness is a fact about the present. On its own, it is not evidence about the past. To get from the one to the other, somebody has to find a case where the contrast itself makes a difference that can be counted. Not a story about the difference, a measurement of it. So the question stands exactly where it stood. Every creature that hunts and every creature that is hunted works to conceal where it is looking. You broadcast it all day long to anybody in the room. Now at least you can see what the broadcasting buys. What we still cannot see is how anybody would show that this is the reason it is there. And before anyone could design an experiment to test that, there was something simpler to try first. Something almost gentle. Take the plainest task you can imagine and set it in front of a human infant and in front of another great ape. A person turns their head and moves their eyes and looks at something across the room. Then you watch which part of that face each one follows. That is where we go next. So here is the room. It is a plain room with very little in it. A person is sitting on one side of a table, and on the other side is somebody who is going to watch them. That is the whole arrangement. Nothing is hidden, and nothing much is at stake. The person at the table does one small thing. They look up at the ceiling. That is the entire task. Then everybody waits to see whether the watcher looks up as well. It sounds like nothing at all. It is in fact one of the more elegant things anybody has done in this field. The elegance is in what the researchers took away, rather than in anything they added. Because looking up at the ceiling is not one action, it is two actions, bundled so tightly together that you have very likely never pulled them apart. Try it where you are, gently, without making a project of it. Keep your head exactly where it is now, and let your eyes travel up and come back down. Nothing else moved. Now leave your eyes resting where they are, and tip your head back a little instead, and bring it slowly down again. Those are two different movements, run by two different sets of muscles, and they nearly always travel together. That is why they feel like one single thing. They are not. So the researchers separated them, which is the whole idea. You just did that separation yourself, a moment ago, with no laboratory involved. That is very nearly all the experiment is. Somebody noticed that two signals ride along together in ordinary life, and wondered what would happen if they were sent one at a time. In one version, head and eyes went up together, the way they normally do. In another, the head tipped back while the eyes stayed closed, so that the only thing on offer was the movement of a whole head. In a third, the head stayed perfectly still, and only the eyes travelled upward. And there was a version where the person did very little at all, so that nobody was fooled by a watcher who simply liked looking at ceilings. Put yourself on the watching side of that table for a second. The version where head and eyes go up together would barely register as information. It is just a person looking at the ceiling. The version where only the eyes move is a far thinner thing to catch, and you would catch it anyway, without effort, and without ever knowing you had. Then the same quiet task was given to great apes and to human infants. The great apes followed the head. The human infants followed the eyes. Same room, same person, same ceiling. Two different parts of one face, and each watcher went to a different one. Read those two sentences again slowly. Nothing in either of them is about ability. They are about which part of a face a watcher trusts. Now I want to be careful here, because this is exactly the place in the story where it is easy to say something that is both unkind and untrue. Nothing failed in that room. Nobody was outperformed, and nobody came second. Think for a moment about what makes a signal worth reading. It has to carry information, and it has to be legible from where you are standing. A cue nobody can see is not a cue at all, however much meaning is packed inside it. You know this from your own evenings. Somebody speaks to you from another room and you catch none of it, not because the words were poor, but because they never arrived intact. Information has to survive the trip. In the faces a chimpanzee grows up among, the eye carries less contrast between the iris and the tissue around it. So a small sideways movement of that iris is simply a quieter signal, and it stays quiet across a distance, in shifting forest light, from the side through leaves. The head is another matter entirely. A head is large, it swings through a wide arc, and it is visible from a long way off. It stays readable when the light is poor, or the angle is bad, or the face is half turned away. So the head is not a fallback. It is the better instrument for the job, given the faces that are actually in the room. They are not missing the eyes, they are reading the cue that genuinely carries the information in the faces they grew up among, and reading it well. Grow up among those faces, and you would read the head too. You would read it because it works, and you would be entirely right to. And they read it very well indeed. Great apes follow gaze reliably and often. They will follow it around an obstacle, moving quietly to get a line of sight on whatever is behind it. When the first look turns up nothing, they will come back to the face, check it again, and follow it out a second time. That is not a rough or approximate skill. That is careful, patient work with a cue that pays. There is something almost companionable in that second check. A face turns, they follow it out, find nothing there, and come back calmly to the face as if to ask, where exactly? That is one creature treating another creature's attention as a source of news. You did the very same thing this week, when somebody nearby looked up suddenly and you turned to find out why. Given a problem and a certain set of available information, they solve the problem with what is actually there. That is not a lesser answer. That is what solving something looks like. Now sit with the other half of it, because it is stranger than it first appears. Picture the human infant in that room. This is somebody who cannot walk to the thing, cannot reach it, cannot ask about it, and cannot be told. They cannot sit up unaided for very long. They have no idea what a ceiling is, no word for it, no reason to care about it. Everything you would ordinarily use to get at something across a room, they simply do not have yet. And that person is already taking a face like yours apart into its pieces, deciding which piece is carrying the message, and then choosing the smallest, quietest piece on the whole face. Nobody taught them that. There was no lesson. It arrives with them, or it arrives so early and so easily that the difference hardly matters. There is no stage at which a small child is sat down and told where to look. The looking comes first. The words turn up long afterwards to describe something that was already happening. An infant who cannot yet hold their own head steady is reading the movement of an iris across a room. Let that sit for a second, because we do not usually put those two facts next to each other. We think of a small child as somebody who cannot do things yet, and here is a thing they are already doing, quietly, competently, before almost anything else is in place. Think about what that means for the room you are in right now. It means the skill you are using in the first minutes of this is not a skill that anybody gave you. Nobody taught it at school. Nobody handed it over. You had it before you had language. Somebody could sit 6 feet away with their head absolutely still, and you would know where their attention had gone, and know it in a fraction of a second. So it is the same task and two different cues, and the infant is reading the finer of the two. I want to be exact about that word. Finer here means smaller. It does not mean better, and it does not mean cleverer. It means that the thing being read is a few millimeters of movement, rather than the swing of an entire head. And a finer signal is a more fragile signal. That is the trade. A head can be read in near darkness, at a distance, from behind, through undergrowth. An iris travelling a short way sideways can only be read if there is enough contrast around it to make that small movement stand out from everything else. Which means the infant's strategy is only a good strategy in a particular kind of company. It pays off exactly and only in a world where the faces nearby are built so that a small movement carries. You can feel the shape of the argument gathering here. One kind of eye, one kind of cue, one kind of reader, all fitting together neatly. And this is where I have to slow you down a little, because the neatness is doing something we have not earned yet. Everything I have described tonight is a difference in behaviour. Two kinds of watcher went to two different parts of a face. That is a real result, carefully obtained, and it has held up. It is not a demonstration of a cause. Consider how many things are different between a human infant and a great ape, over and above the contrast in an eye. They have spent their days among different faces. They have different histories of being looked at, and looked after, and pointed at. A person staring up at a ceiling means something slightly different in each of their lives. Any one of those could produce the result on its own, without the contrast doing a single thing. That is the trouble with a story that fits well. A story that fits is not the same as a cause you have shown. You have probably been on the wrong end of one of those. A tidy explanation arrives, everything clicks into place, and it is months before anyone notices that nobody ever checked it. So what would it actually take? You would have to hold everything else perfectly still. Same faces, same watchers, same room, same ceiling, same everything. And then change one thing only, which is the contrast in the eye itself, and see whether the reading changes with it, which sounds impossible, given that you cannot go around rebuilding anybody's eyes. It is not impossible. Somebody worked out how to do it. They did not touch a single eye. They took pictures of them instead, and then they reversed the contrast, so that a chimpanzee's eye was shown with a pale surround and a darker iris. The same eye. The same face. Only the brightness swapped. Then they asked both humans and chimpanzees to read those eyes, and made it hard, and counted how often each one got it right. That is where we go next, and the answer is the reason this whole question is still worth asking. Because everything up to now has been a story we tell about ourselves. What comes next is a number, and a number is allowed to disagree with you. That is the entire reason to go and get one. And underneath all of it, the first question is still sitting there, patient and unanswered. Every animal that hunts and every animal that is hunted works to keep this hidden. You give it away all day to anyone in the room without ever deciding to. Hold that. We are getting closer. That difference is easy to describe. Explaining it is a much harder job. Something about a human eye is easier to read. The head and eye work tells you that much and no more, and it does not tell you what the something is. It could be the contrast, or it could be familiarity, since a lifetime of practice with one kind of face would do a great deal all by itself. It could be the shape of the opening, or the width of the pale band either side, or the way the lids rest against the curve of the eye. A description sets a question down in front of you. It does not answer it. So the interesting work here was always going to be an experiment, not a measurement, not a survey of what happens to be there. An experiment is a thing you build on purpose, so that two explanations are forced to predict different results. Let me take you through one, slowly. It was published in 2022 in a journal called eLife by Fumihiro Kano and his colleagues. Hold the shape of it rather than the names. The shape is the part worth keeping. Here is the task, stripped down to the bone. A face appears. The eyes in that face are turned slightly to one side, and the viewer judges which side. That is the whole job, left or right, over and over, with the picture changing between goes. They ran it with people, and they ran a version of it with chimpanzees as well. The chimpanzee version is worth picturing for a second, because it is gentler than you might imagine. There is a screen, and a face on it, and a choice to touch, and something nice at the end of a correct answer. The animals were not made to do anything. They came over because they wanted to. They worked at their own speed, and they were free to wander off whenever the mood took them. The first result is the one you would probably have guessed. Both species judged the direction of human eyes more accurately than the direction of chimpanzee eyes. People read the human eye better, and there is no surprise in that. The chimpanzees also read the human eye better than they read the eye of their own kind. Stay with that for a moment, because it is a quietly odd thing. An animal is shown two faces. The one whose looking it can pin down more precisely is not its own. Nobody is failing here, by the way. A chimpanzee reads another chimpanzee beautifully. It reads posture and hand and shoulder and the whole turn of the body, and it does that faster than you or I ever could. The finding is not that one animal sees poorly. It is that one kind of eye hands over its direction more freely than the other kind does. Then comes the second result, and this is where the design of the study starts to show. The advantage was not a flat, constant thing. It grew. When the image was easy, both eyes did well enough. Bright, close, straight on, plenty of time. Everything works when the picture is clear. An easy image is a weak test. Almost nothing is being asked of the signal, so almost nothing is revealed about it. So they made it hard on purpose. They dropped the light, pushed the face further away, and tilted it to an awkward angle, so the eye was no longer facing the viewer square. In those harder conditions, the gap widened. The human eye held on to its direction. The chimpanzee eye lost its direction faster. That is exactly the pattern you would expect from a signal that is built to work in the real world. Think about the room you are lying in right now. Whatever light is in it, it is not laboratory light. If somebody else is in the house with you, they are almost certainly not directly in front of you at a comfortable distance with their face turned squarely towards yours. They are off to one side, or across the room, with half of them in shadow. That is where you have always read gaze. Not in perfect conditions, but in ordinary, slightly awkward, badly lit ones. And that is exactly where the difference between these two eyes turns out to be biggest. Now, the objection. And it is a good objection, so let me put it to you properly, with no thumb on the scale. Familiarity. Every participant in that study lives around human faces. The people obviously do. The chimpanzees in that research setting have spent their whole lives with human caretakers coming and going, being looked at and looked after by people. Both species have had far more practice with a human eye than with a photograph of a chimpanzee eye on a screen. Practice sharpens perception, and that is not in doubt. You do this yourself constantly. You read the faces you have known for years more finely than the face of someone met last week. Nothing about that requires an eye to be built any particular way. So if practice is the entire story, every result I have just described follows along behind it, and the contrast has nothing to do with any of it. That is a real problem for the neat version. You cannot talk around an objection like that. It has to be tested. Here is the move they made, and it is a lovely one. They took the chimpanzee eye and reversed its contrast digitally. The darker outer part was made pale. The paler inner part was made dark. Same eye, same shape, same opening, same width of exposed band, same face around it. Nothing else was touched. Only the brightness was swapped. A chimpanzee eye, wearing a human eye's arrangement of light and dark. An eye that has never lived. Hold that picture. Now set the two explanations against it, one at a time. This is the part I want you to enjoy, because it is where an experiment stops describing and starts deciding. If familiarity is doing the work, the reversed eye should be read worse. Nobody has ever seen an eye like that. Not the people, not the chimpanzees, not their caretakers, not anyone in the history of either species. It is the least familiar image in the entire study, and practice predicts that it should be the hardest of all. If contrast is doing the work, the reversed eye should be read better. The direction is now carried by a bright field with a dark centre sitting somewhere in it, and that is a shape any eye can find. Two explanations, opposite predictions, one picture. That was the whole test. Both species read the reversed eye better. Both of them. The people improved and the chimpanzees improved on an image that neither of them had encountered once in their lives, and that does not exist anywhere in the world outside that screen. Let that settle for a second, because of how far it moves the claim. Before the reversal, the honest version was two facts placed side by side. Human eyes look different from other primate eyes. Human gaze is easier to read. The link between those two sentences was assumed, sensibly enough, but it was assumed. After the reversal, you can say something firmer. The contrast itself is doing measurable work, not the familiarity and not the flattering story we like telling about ourselves. I want to be careful about what that phrase means, because it is doing a lot of quiet lifting. Measurable work means the property can be lifted out of the animal that owns it, set down somewhere it has never been, and watched as it keeps working. Take the contrast on its own, drop it into an eye that never had it, show it to a species that is not ours, and that eye becomes easier to read. It travels, it works in a face it does not belong to, and for a viewer it was never aimed at. That is a physical property of an image, behaving like a physical property. There is a real pleasure in that, and I think it is worth naming while you are lying there in the warm. Most of what we say about ourselves is description. This is unlike that. Description tells you what is so. A manipulation tells you which of the reasons is still standing afterwards. You reach into the thing, change exactly one property, hold everything else as still as you can, and then let the world tell you which prediction was right. They could have run that study and got the other answer. That is the entire point of it. If the reversed eye had come out worse, the contrast idea would have taken a serious wound, and the familiarity idea would have walked away with the evening. The design gave both of them a fair chance to win, which is the only kind of design that is worth the months it costs. And it did cost months. Somebody sat down and thought hard about what would have to be true and what would have to be false, and then built the one picture that could tell those two apart. Then somebody came in every day afterwards in a quiet room and ran it and waited for animals who felt like joining in. So keep this much, gently, as we go on. The contrast carries the signal that is not a story about human beings. It is a result, and it came from a species that is not ours, reading an eye that has never existed, and reading it better because of where the light was, which is a real answer to a real question. It is just not the question you came in with. You still do not know why an animal would hand over the one thing every other creature on this earth works to keep hidden. You still do not know what had to be true about our lives before giving it away could possibly be safe. Both of those are sitting exactly where they were when you started listening tonight. And there is one more thing waiting, which I have been holding back for a while now. The clean sentence I have been leaning on for the last several chapters, the tidy one about the human eye being unlike any other eye in the world, has been under careful examination for some years, not by opponents, not by anybody trying to knock it over for sport, by people doing precisely the kind of patient work you have just been listening to. They went and looked at more eyes, and at more kinds of eyes, and at a great deal more of the ordinary variety among us. And what they found was that the sentence is a good deal tidier than the world actually is. Tidier than you are, in fact. Tidier than the person in the next room. Some of it survives that, some of it does not. That is the next thing. It is the part of this story I have been most looking forward to telling you, and I have been saving it for this hour of the night. Something has been sitting slightly crooked in the way I have been telling you this. It is time I straightened it out. For 7 chapters I have handed you a very clean line. Human eyes are unlike any other eyes on this earth. Clean lines are lovely to listen to in the dark, and they are exactly where you should look hardest. Since about 2021, a number of careful people have been looking hard at this one. Let me set the tone before I start, because the tone matters more than the facts here. The researchers who built this idea did good work. They measured real things, in the right way, and they measured them first. The people correcting them now are doing the same job with better tools, bigger samples, and 30 more years of eyes to look at. Nobody in this story is embarrassed. This is not a demolition, it is a resurfacing, and the road stays exactly where it was. 3 things have shifted. 2 of them matter a great deal, and one of them is the reason I wanted to tell you about eyes at all. The first is a single word. Uniquely, the tidy version of this story says that a pale, exposed sclera is uniquely human. No other primate has it. We stand alone in a family of dark, unreadable eyes. When people went back and looked at more individual animals, that turned out to be too strong. Pale sclera show up in chimpanzees, not in every chimpanzee, and not to the same degree, but they are there in real animals, photographed and measured. Some chimpanzees have noticeably light eyes. If you have only ever met a chimpanzee in a photograph, you have almost certainly met the dark-eyed sort, because that is the one that gets printed. The variety inside a species is the first thing a small sample hides from you. The same is true across other primates, and pale sclera turn up in other mammals well outside our branch of the tree. So it is not a switch that only we possess. It is a matter of degree and of how often, which is a much more ordinary kind of fact, and a much more likely one. It is worth understanding how the overstatement happened, because it was not carelessness. The original comparison had 1 or 2 individuals from many species. That is a sensible way to start, and it is often the only way to start. You would have done the same in their position, and so would I. but a single animal cannot show you the spread within its own kind. If you photograph one chimpanzee with dark eyes, the chimpanzee eye becomes dark and stays dark in every retelling afterwards. Then the sentence gets repeated, and a sentence hardens every time it is repeated. The measurement was honest, and the adjective simply travelled further than the measurement could carry it. That happens to every good finding that becomes popular. It has probably happened to 2 or 3 things you believe firmly tonight. Now the second correction, which is the one I have been waiting for, and it is about you. Open almost any account of this and you will find a version of the same sentence. It goes something like this. Humans have white eyes, other primates do not. It is tidy, it is memorable, and the first half of it is not accurate. Human sclera are not uniformly white. Scleral and conjunctival pigmentation varies substantially from person to person and between populations, and visible pigmentation in the white of the eye is common. It is more common among people with darker skin. Creams and warm ivories, faint greys, soft browns, small settled patches of colour near the outer corners. This is not rare, and it is not unusual. It is one of the ordinary ways that human beings differ from one another. I want to say the next part as plainly as I know how, because this is where accounts of it usually go wrong. That variation is not a departure from a standard. There is no standard to depart from. It is the ordinary range of a species, in exactly the way that hair varies and skin varies, and it always has been. No population on this earth has more evolved eyes, and none has less evolved ones. No eye is nearer to a correct version, and no eye is further from one, because there is no correct version anywhere for an eye to be near. There is a range. Every one of us is somewhere inside it, and being inside it is the whole of what there is to be. That is true of hair. It is true of skin. It is true of the colouring at the front of the eye. And it has been true for as long as there have been people around to have eyes at all. You have been looking at this range your whole life without once giving it a name. Think of the faces you have been close to today, or this week, or for years. Brought to mind side by side, in daylight, the differences would be plain, and not one of them would have ever seemed worth a second thought. Nobody has ever looked into the eyes of somebody they love and thought, that one is the wrong shade. You saw a person. You read where they were looking. You were right. So the textbook line describes some human eyes and then quietly treats those as the human eye. That is the entire error, and it is a very ordinary one. People describe the eyes closest to hand and let that description stand in for a species of 8 billion. Now here is the part I most want you to carry away, because this correction improves the story rather than damaging it. The interesting fact was never whiteness. It was contrast, and it was horizontal exposure. Neither of those requires anybody's eye to be white. Contrast is a relationship between 2 things, not a colour. A pale sclera against a dark iris carries direction beautifully. So does a warm cream one against a dark iris. So does a soft grey one, and a lightly pigmented one, and a faintly golden one. What a watching eye needs is a difference, a field at one brightness, a centre at another, and an edge between them that can be found across a room. None of that says white anywhere in it. It does not say it about your eyes, and it does not say it about anybody else's. Think back to the reversed eye I described a little while ago. Nobody made it white. They made the outside lighter than the middle, which is an entirely different requirement, and that was all the experiment ever needed. And the other half is the shape, which does not care about colour at all. A horizontally stretched opening lets the iris travel a long way sideways and stay visible the whole distance. That works in any colouring at all. It works in yours. Which means the correction takes nothing away from you. It takes something away from a sentence. There is a third thing, smaller than the other two, and rather charming in its way. You have probably absorbed the folk version of all this without ever being taught it. Open eyes are honest eyes. You can trust a person whose eyes you can see clearly. Shifty gets described as narrow, and warmth gets described as wide. Somebody tested that in 2018. They showed people faces that differed in how much sclera was exposed and asked them to rate how trustworthy each face seemed. If the cozy story were right, the wider, paler-looking eyes should have scored higher. They did not. More exposed sclera did not make a face read as more trustworthy. It was a reasonable thing to have wondered about. And it was tested properly. The faces were the same faces, altered in that one respect and nothing else, so that no other difference could account for the ratings. Trust turns out to be assembled somewhere else entirely, out of behaviour, out of history, out of what a person has actually done over time, which is where it ought to be assembled. I find that a genuine relief, and I think you might too. The eye is not a moral organ. It has no opinion about the person it belongs to. It reports one thing only, which is where its owner is currently looking, and it reports that to anyone in the room with the wit to read it. Your character is not written on the front of your eyeball. Neither is anybody else's. Whatever we have all been told about honest faces, it is not sitting in that tissue. So let me gather up what is actually left standing, because it is less than I promised and better than I promised. The measurable part is untouched. All of it. Both species read a humanized direction more accurately. The advantage widened as the viewing got harder, and giving a chimpanzee eye the human arrangement of light and dark improved it for everyone looking. Nothing in these three corrections lays a finger on that. Contrast does measurable work, and it is still doing it tonight, in whatever light you are lying in. What got walked back is two words: uniquely and white. Uniquely goes because other animals have some of this too, in smaller amounts and less often. White goes because it was never true of all of us, and because it was never what mattered. And notice how much stronger the sentence gets once those two words are gone. Before we had a claim about how a certain eye looks. Now we have a claim about how any eye works. The first one flatters us. The second one can be tested, in the dark, at a distance, on an animal that is not us. That is the trade this whole correction makes, and it is a good trade. It is the trade that patient work makes over and over. A claim about how something looks becomes a claim about how something works, and a claim about how something works can be taken apart and put back together and argued with by anybody willing to do the arguing. Which brings you back, at last, to the two things you have been holding since the first minute of tonight. Why would a species hand over the one piece of information that every other creature works so hard to keep? And what had to be true about the way we live before giving it away could possibly have been safe? You now have most of what you need to answer both. The contrast is real. The exposure is real. The reading of it is measurable, and it is not a story we tell about ourselves. You have carried both of those questions a long way tonight. They have been sitting there quietly the whole time, and they are still open. The rest of it is not about eyes at all. It is about who was standing in the room with us and what they were likely to do with what they saw. That is where we go next, and it is the answer. So here is the answer. Both halves of it. Plainly, and in the words the questions arrived in. The first half is the simpler one. Why can you read a gaze at all? Because of contrast, and because of shape. That is the whole of the mechanism. The darker centre sits inside a paler field, and that field is left open on both sides of it. What that arrangement gives you is not a brightness, it is a position. Your visual system is superb at one small task. Find the dark thing against the light thing. That is the only task the eye hands it. Locate the darker centre, then notice which side of it has more room. And the shape does as much of the work as the contrast does, though it gets far less of the credit. A human eye opening tends to run long from side to side, which means the darker centre has somewhere to travel. It can rest to the left and leave a wide pale field on the right. It can rest to the right and leave that field on the left. Sideways movement is legible because there is a track for it to move along. Take the track away and the same contrast would tell you much less than it does. That is it. That is the answer to the first question, and it is not a deep answer. It is a piece of ordinary optics happening in the front of a face, in whatever light the room happens to have that day, and you do not have to take it on trust. That is the part worth keeping. A while ago tonight, you heard what happened when that arrangement was borrowed and set down where it does not belong. An eye that was not a human eye was given the paler field and the darker centre, and it became easier to read. Not only easier for us looking across at it, easier for its own kind as well. Nothing in that result depends on how anybody feels about people. Move the contrast, and the reading follows the contrast. That is what makes this a finding, rather than a flattering story we tell about our own faces. The effect is real. It is measurable. It has been measured. So you can read a gaze because the eye is easy to locate, and because it has room to move where the movement shows. Now the harder half. This is the one that has been standing quietly in the room all night. Why would an animal give away the one thing worth hiding? Because where a creature is looking is where it is about to go. It is what it is about to reach for. It is what it has just noticed, and would rather nobody knew it had noticed. For almost everything alive, that is a plan, and a disclosed plan is a lost one. So it gets covered. You have heard how thoroughly and by how many different means, across how much of the living world. And the answer is not that we found some way to make the disclosure harmless. We did not. It is still the most valuable thing about you. Anyone near enough to see your eyes can have it, free in a quarter of a second. The answer is about who is standing near enough. Giving away where you are looking is only survivable in a creature whose whole living is made with other people. Not part of it, the whole of it. The food you ate today passed through more hands than anyone could count. The room around you was made by hands that will never be named. Language itself was handed over by strangers, one word at a time, long before any of it was chosen. For an animal living like that, the nearest reader is overwhelmingly likely to be someone who will use what they read to help. They will pass over the thing that was out of reach. They will look where you are looking and see the same thing there. They will understand, without a word being spoken, exactly what was meant. That is the condition. The signal is safe to broadcast only among those who will do something kind with it. Now hold that condition still for a moment, because it runs the opposite way from how this story usually gets told. The tidy version says the eye came first, and cooperation followed after it, as though a readable face were the invention that made us able to work together at all. It is a story you have probably met somewhere, in some form. It is the other way round. The eye did not create cooperation. It is evidence of it. A creature that could not afford to be read would never have come to be read this easily. The readability is not the beginning of the story. It is the mark the story left behind. You inherited it. You did not invent it. Somewhere back along a very long stretch of time, being legible stopped costing more than it paid, and that is a fact about the company we kept, rather than a fact about optics. The optics only arrived afterwards to make it visible, so the two questions turn out to be one question asked twice. How can this work? Contrast and exposure. Why is it allowed to work? Because of who was standing close by. That is the answer, and I think it is a good one. Now let me tell you honestly what is still being argued over, because it would be a poor sort of comfort to leave you with a tidier ending than the evidence will actually carry. 3 threads are still open, and careful people are standing on both sides of each one. The first is how unusual any of this really is. The version that reached the textbooks, and that probably reached you, said this eye was ours alone. That sentence was too strong. Pale sclera turns up in chimpanzees and in other mammals besides, in various degrees and at various frequencies, and researchers keep finding more of them the more carefully they look. So it is not a switch that only one species happens to have. It is a matter of degree, and of how common that degree is within a species, which makes your own eye unusual rather than unheard of, and those are very different claims. What survives is quieter and probably truer. We tend toward more contrast and more exposed field more of the time. That is still a real difference. It is simply not the clean line it was first drawn as. The second thread is harder, and it may never fully close. Is this eye an adaptation for signalling, or a byproduct of something else? The difference matters more than it sounds like it should. An adaptation is a feature that was shaped across a long time by the advantage it gave. A byproduct is a feature that arrived for some other reason entirely and was only afterwards put to use. Both can leave you with the same face. Both can leave you with an eye that broadcasts. Only one of them means the broadcasting is what the eye is for. And it is genuinely difficult to tell those two apart from the outside long after the fact. There is no record of what the pressure was. There is only the result, and you can find the result in any mirror in the house. So when somebody tells you this eye is for signalling, they are telling you something that may well be true and is very hard to demonstrate. And the careful ones say so out loud. It is entirely possible that both are true in sequence. That the contrast arrived alongside other changes, for reasons of its own, and was then kept and sharpened because of what it turned out to do. That would be an ordinary way for a body to acquire a use. It would also be a far harder claim to prove than the one first made. The third thread is the one I want to be most careful with, and it is the one that changes the picture most. Human eyes are not uniformly white. They never have been. The pale part of the eye carries pigment in a great many people, in soft golds and creams and greys and warmer browns, and visible pigmentation is common and entirely ordinary. It is more often visible in people with darker skin. All of that is the ordinary range of a healthy species, in the same plain way that hair and skin come in a range, and it is not a departure from a standard, because there is no standard there to depart from. If you have ever looked closely at the eyes of someone you love, you have probably seen some of that range already, without ever putting a name to it. Which means the textbook line was describing some human eyes and quietly calling them the human eye. So what does that do to the argument? That is the live part. Some researchers think it does real damage, because a theory resting on a feature that varies this much needs rebuilding from further down. Others think the core holds, because what makes a gaze readable was never whiteness in the first place. It was contrast, and it was exposure, and both of those sit right across the ordinary range. Your eye does not need to be bright to be legible. It needs a darker centre and a paler surround, with room on either side, and that is what human eyes have in common. I find the second view more persuasive. I also think the first view is doing something valuable, and that the correction was long overdue. None of this is a failure. I want to be clear with you about that, because it is easy to hear an open argument as a collapse. The people who first measured these eyes did painstaking work, comparing one species to another, one photograph at a time, and what they found was real. The people revising it now are doing the same kind of work with better tools and a wider sample. That is not one side losing to the other. That is the thing working. So the honest shape of it is this, an answer that is mostly holding, with the edges being redrawn by people who are being careful about it. The gaze signal is real and measured. The reason it is safe to send is our company, and how unusual it truly is, and how much of it was built for this, and how the whole ordinary range of human eyes fits into the picture, are all still being worked out. Slowly and quietly, by people who will probably not settle it soon. That is more honest than a clean ending, and it leaves the part you can check yourself entirely intact, which is the part that belongs to you tonight. Because whatever gets decided about the eye, the reading still works. It worked this morning, in the first face you saw. It will work again tomorrow in the first face you see then. And it is working now, in the room where you are, in whatever light is left in it. So that is what it comes down to. The most social organ in the body is not your mouth, and it is not your hands. It is a piece of ordinary tissue at the front of your eye that does nothing cleverer than reflect light. There is no wiring in it for the job. It sends nothing, and it chooses nothing. It is a tough outer coat holding a soft round thing in shape, and one part of it happens to throw back more light than the part sitting beside it. That is the entire machinery, and that is all of it. Nothing about that arrangement looks like a communication device. It looks like plumbing. It looks like the kind of thing a body grows, because a body has to be built out of something, and then keeps, because there was never any reason to change it. The whole mechanism would fit inside a single sentence with room left over at the end of it. A pale part beside a dark part, with the pale part wide enough to show which way the dark part has gone. And out of that one small difference in brightness comes pointing, and teaching, and handing a thing across to a person who has not turned round yet. Comes knowing what a friend meant from the other side of a crowded room, without either of you saying a word about it. Almost all of the quiet traffic that runs between people, all day, every day, rides on how much light comes back, off two neighbouring pieces of a face. That is worth sitting with a moment, not because it is grand, because it is so small and so plain and made of nothing that was ever designed for the purpose. Your whole visible life with other people rests on a piece of tissue doing what a pale wall does in sunlight. And you have been reading it all day. That is the part I keep coming back to. Not that it works, that it was done constantly and never once decided on. Think about who came past today, if anybody did. The person who handed something over, the one who came the other way through a doorway and moved to the correct side, with no word spoken between them. A face at a window. Somebody across a road who checked the traffic and then looked at you, and you knew the order they had done it in. Every one of them was read. Not one of them was remembered. There is no effort attached to any of it anywhere in the day, and no line in the account for it. Nobody sat you down and taught it. It has never once been practiced, and it is still the most practiced thing you do. Now come back to where all of this started. At the beginning of tonight there was a room, and one small thing to notice in it. Whether anybody else was there in it, and whether, if they were, you already knew what they were looking at. Not roughly. Exactly, maybe that got done. Maybe it was half imagined, from somewhere already close to sleep. Either way, it worked, and it took no time at all. There was no working out involved. There was no moment where the answer arrived, because the answer was simply there before the question had finished forming. That is what a signal costing nothing feels like from the inside. It feels like nothing whatsoever. If somebody is near you now, they are probably still, and probably quiet, and the light in there is probably low. None of it would make the slightest difference. They could be read from across the room, from the side, in whatever light is left, without either person moving ahead or saying a word about it. And if the room is empty tonight, then the last face read today was read hours ago, in passing. It was read perfectly, and no record of it was kept anywhere at all. That ease was the strange thing at the start. It is still the strange thing now. The only difference is that you know what sits underneath it. A paler field. A darker centre. Room on either side for it to travel where the travelling shows, and somebody standing near enough to be trusted with whatever they find there. There is one more small thing in it, and then the night can go quiet. The signal only runs while your eyes are open. Every creature that hides where it is looking has to go on hiding it, all day, every day, without a single break in it, for as long as it is awake and out in the world. That is work, and it never once stops being work. You have never done that work. The broadcast goes out all day, freely, to anybody near enough to catch it. And then at the end of the day your eyes close, and the whole of it goes out at once. Not hidden and not disguised. Simply finished with until morning. That is the only time it stops. And it is stopping now in an enormous number of rooms, in the ordinary staggered way that darkness moves across a turning world. Somebody in a warm kitchen with the last lamp going off, somebody in a narrow bed beside a window that has been open all evening, somebody who has been awake a great deal too long and has finally set the whole day down, all of them closing one at a time in no particular order, and every last one of them going quiet in exactly the same way. Yours among them. The room around you can be exactly as it is now, the weight of you resting on whatever is underneath, the small sounds outside carrying on with whatever they are doing, and none of it in any hurry at all. Your face has been busy all day, and that goes unnoticed too. The small muscles around the eyes have been aiming since the first thing they landed on this morning. Adjusting and tracking, settling on one thing, and then travelling along to the next, thousands of times over, quietly, without ever once mentioning it. They are slowing down now. There is a softening across the forehead. There is a loosening at the jaw which has probably been holding on to something since the middle of the afternoon. The whole front of the face is going gently out of focus, the way a room does when somebody turns a lamp down low and then leaves it alone. Your breathing has already changed. It usually does, right about here, without being asked. Longer on the way out than on the way in, and slower than it was when all of this began. And warmer. The two questions have their answers now. The parts still being argued over are being argued over somewhere else entirely, carefully and patiently, by people who are glad of the work and in no rush at all to finish it. They will still be at it in the morning, in a bright room a long way from here. So the room settles now, and you settle with it. Your hands are heavier than they were an hour ago. The shoulders have come down from wherever they had been holding themselves all day. The backs of your legs are warm against whatever is underneath them. Your feet are heavy. And all of it is drifting a little further down into the quiet, with every slow breath that goes out and is not hurried back. The light in the room, whatever is left of it, has gone soft at the edges. Corners have stopped being corners. The shapes of ordinary things have loosened into one another, the way they do at this hour. The room becomes less a set of separate objects and more a single warm space, with somebody resting in the middle of it. Your eyes are not being asked to do anything in here. Nothing in this room wants finding. Nothing in it wants following. Somewhere beyond the wall the world goes on without any help. A car, far off, taking a long curve. Wind moving through something out in the dark and then moving away again. A door closing gently in another part of the building, and then nothing after it at all. Whatever hour it is out there is going on being that hour, slowly, in the dark, with nobody counting it. All of it lovely, and all of it entirely elsewhere, and none of it reaching in this far. The day has finished putting itself away. Whatever was in it has gone down into the ordinary heap of days behind you, where all the others are, and the room has gone on being warm and dim around it, without needing anything else to happen. And in here it is warm, and it is dim, and it is unhurried. The warmth has settled into everything it touches, into the covers and the air just above them, and into the small still space around your hands where nothing is moving at all. Your eyes have been open a long time today, since before the light was properly up, most likely. They have been aiming at things all day. They have been reading other faces and being read by other people, hour after hour, across counters and along paths and through the whole ordinary crowded middle of the day. Thousands of times over. And none of it ever cost you a thing. They can rest now. Feel how heavy the lids have become, sitting there. Feel how little it would take for them to close the rest of the way. That warm, weighted, sinking feeling behind them is the oldest signal your body has, and it has been growing steadily louder for a while now, underneath everything else, waiting for the room to go quiet enough to be heard in. The room is quiet enough now. There is a slowness that arrives at this hour whether anybody invites it or not. And it is here already, moving through the room the way warm air moves, with no edges on it anywhere. Everything is slow, Everything is warm. Everything is exactly where it will be for the next several hours, and the whole shape of the night is settled, and the settling is happening on its own without anybody arranging a thing. Your body is heavy and warm and easy. It goes a little softer with every breath that leaves it, and then a little softer again. It is a long way down, and it is warm the whole way. The sounds have moved further out, and the room is going with them, gently, unhurried, the way rooms do at the end of a long day, until there is only warmth left in it, and weight, and the slow, even, endless movement of breathing that nobody is watching over any more. And now the last of it goes. The room has gone still around you. Your breathing is slow and even and easy, and it's settled there all on its own. And your eyes, open and working and read by somebody all day long, are closed now, and warm and still.